Good morning. Good morning. So we're going to do 2 talks today on the aging brain, and they are going to be complementary. So we will finish our first talk this morning, and we will not have really even delved into Alzheimer's dementia. That will be in our second talk. So the first talk will be about factors that contribute to aging and increase your risk of dementia. And in our second talk, we're going to bring together all the variables and show you how they work together. And then some specific actions you can take, including food choices and other things, that can help prevent dementia and keep us young as we age. For those who don't know yet, out there on the table, this book, The Aging Brain, Proven Steps to Prevent Dementia and Sharpen Your Mind, came out from Baker Books last year, and these are free. Our ministry has provided these, Come and Reason Ministries, so if you'd like to pick one up, they're out there on the tables for free. So risk factors as a metaphor, let's talk about this for a moment. I'm going to give you more information today than you can assimilate. So don't be overwhelmed and don't feel like you're drowning. I'm just going to do that. You're not going to get it all today. That's okay. But I want you to consider the risk factors that contribute to aging, the metaphor of keeping your car in good running order versus the risk factors that either put your car at risk for breaking down or having a wreck. And driving a poorly constructed vehicle. You remember the ignition key switch problems that some vehicles had? Okay, this would be born with genetic or epigenetic risks for dementia. Some people have higher risks genetically than other people do. Driving a vehicle in poor condition, persons who don't exercise or fail to maintain their health. Driving a vehicle with defective or worn out brakes. These are people who have impaired ability to slow themselves down, calm themselves down. They're just always on the go all the time. Driving vehicles with bald tires. These are the people who are overly emotional, who are slipping and sliding on the emotional ground all the time. Distractions such as texting, changing the radio station, other people in the car. This is caught up in entertainment, alcohol, drugs, addiction, such that you don't attend to your health. Poor vision. Lack of education, lack of insight, lack of understanding. Just don't know, didn't know. Wet, snowy, or icy conditions. These are toxins, pollution, industrial exposures that we can have in our life as we go through and that can affect our health, accelerate aging, and put us at higher risk. Purposeful sabotage, victims of abuse, crime, war. Sleeping at the wheel. Failure to listen, failure to learn, just ignoring the guidance when it's presented. Addressing one or more of the risk factors for your car does not guarantee you won't have a car breakdown and does not guarantee you won't get in a wreck. Nor does having one or more of those problems, addressing them, guarantee you won't have dementia. However, the more of them you address, the less likely you are to have the problem. Does that make sense? So too with the risk for dementia. Okay, so understanding design law. How many were all of you at my talk last night? Okay. So, design law, God built space, time, energy, matter, life. He's the creator. He creates reality. His laws are the laws upon which reality operates. Many of them you know, law of gravity, laws of physics, laws of health. But all of the laws that God has designed or created are design laws. This is how they operate. Some will go, what about the moral laws? Think about that. What's wrong with committing adultery? The same thing as cheating on your, or same thing as going 35 in a 30 zone? Is that the same problem? No. What happens to the adulterer if his wife or the husband never finds out? Can they get away with it, or does something happen inside them? Yes. Okay. Residual action. Yes. When you cheat, you sear your conscience. You're under conviction. You will begin, if you don't confess, repent, and have a transformation through God's grace, you will begin to lie to yourself. You'll begin to become more suspicious of others. You'll become more fearful and anxious because you're fearful of getting caught, etc., etc. In other words, you can't avoid damaging consequences to breaking God's law, just like you can't avoid damaging consequences for stepping off a building. Just the way reality operates. This is the understanding of design law. The principles, protocols upon which life is built, you can just call them the laws of health. You cannot have health outside the laws of health. Why don't you put water in the gas tank of your car? It's so much cheaper than gasoline. Why don't you do it? Because it wasn't designed to run on water, okay? This type of thinking I'm teaching you about design law is counter to how human organizations run. Human organizations impose rules and then punish people for breaking rules. That's how all the governments of the world run. And it's immature. Immature people think that way. It's okay to smoke tobacco or marijuana as long as it's legal. This is what you'll say. Your kids will do this. Adolescents, it's legal now. I can smoke it. Okay? The mature recognize making it legal doesn't make it healthy. See, humans can pass laws to make marijuana legal. They can never pass laws to make it healthy. That's the difference between man's laws and God's laws. And really trying to think along this level will give you an insight and wisdom in how you live your life. It's not possible to be healthy while violating the laws of health. Whether physical laws, whether you can't have healthy relationships violating the laws upon which God built relationships to operate. There are actual laws, law of truth, law of liberty. You can't get love threatening to kill the person who doesn't love you. Okay? So if you violate those, you can't have healthy relationships. And you can't have healthy spirituality, healthy character development, violating the laws upon which God built our minds to operate. This is how reality works. So with that in mind, what is aging? Well, is aging simply living a long time, chronologically growing older? It's not. We want to live eternally, don't we? In an earth made new. So aging is not just living a long time. What we mean by aging is functionally growing older, a slow decline in vitality and ability. That's what we really mean when we say aging. I think most of us would love to be like the antediluvians. If you ever thought about that in the scripture, imagine if you knew you were going to live another 900 years. Just think about that for a minute. Just think about it. 900 more years. Do you construct your house differently when you build your house?
A little differently.
Yeah, everything switches, doesn't it? And ladies, just imagine that. You could have like 600 kids. That doesn't seem so appealing all of a sudden, does it? But it means a functional decline, a slow decline in our vitality and ability. And we all have moved through time at the same rate. For each one of us, there's 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day. We move through time at the same rate, but we all don't age at the same rate.
True.
Some age more. Some lose their abilities and functionality faster than others. So what is it that contributes to the slow decline? In this world we live in, first factor that contributes to the decline is chronological age, because of the second law of thermodynamics. And the second law of thermodynamics is the law of entropy. If you're not putting energy into a system, that system will slowly decay over time. Leave your house or home for 20 years and don't do anything to it. Come back 20 years later, it will not be in the same condition as when you left. It will have decayed. Park your car in the yard for 20 years and come back, it will decay over time. The question is, what about the human genome? Is the human genome evolving to higher forms of complexity and new information coding, or is the human genome slowly degrading over time? You see, there are two worldviews. We're going to get to those worldviews in a minute, but the two worldviews are that through evolutionary processes, our genome is evolving to higher forms of complexity with better information coding, or the biblical worldview that dying you shall die, that slow, gradual decay, as we are disconnected from the infinite source of input, energy, and sustenance. Which is true? Second law of thermodynamics would suggest that over time the human genome is decaying. Well, the human genome, what is it? It's an instruction manual. To think of your genome as a library of information. That's what it is. It's data. It's information. The DNA molecules themselves would be letters in the alphabet. Clustering these together form words. These word groups form sentences. We would call these genes, these sentences. Chapters, putting sentences together, form chapters, or the genes together form chromosomes, which would be volumes of information. And then the volumes together, all the chromosomes, form a library of information, 3.2 billion base pairs, coded information in our DNA. That's what the human genome is. So is it advancing with more new complex chapters being written with new information to make us smarter, wiser, faster, stronger, healthier, or are we slowly decaying? Sanford's book, Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome, he's an applied geneticist from Cornell, actually has documented and gone through the research, and no geneticist, Bible-believing or not Bible-believing, disputes the science in his book, because the science is the science. And what does it show? And this is just a summation up here. Per generation, this is per generation here. These are the different types of mutations in the human genome per generation. Greater than 1,000 new mutations in your genome every generation. I have 1,000 mutations in my genes that my parents did not have. 2,000 more than my grandparents, 3,000 more than my great-grandparents. Every generation, the human genome is slowly decaying. There has not been one mutation thus far identified that makes the genome healthier, stronger, more complex, or adds information. Every mutation is degrading or damaging to us that's been identified thus far. So the science shows that the biblical worldview is the one that's consistent with the science. We're slowly degrading over time. We're not advancing, becoming stronger. A person at 65 will have in their DNA up to 6,000 new point mutations that happened since their birth during their lifespan. 6,000 more were added, in addition to the 1,000 they were born with. Each generation receives 1,000 more, and there's not been one that's been advancing the species. So the human genome is slowly degrading. First factor that contributes to aging is this slow degrade and chronological decline through time. Second is telomeres. Now, what are telomeres? Telomeres are the end caps on the end of your chromosomes. If you remember your high school biology, something called mitosis. Anybody remember mitosis in high school biology? When one cell divides to make a copy of itself, to replace itself, both cells need a copy of the library of information, so the chromosomes copy themselves. That picture is depicting the chromosomes dividing and copying themselves. And the chromosomes can only copy themselves if the telomeres are long enough. And the telomeres are kind of like the plastic caps on the end of your shoestrings. Just keep things organized and keep things in the right direction. And if they get too short, then the chromosomes can't divide. And if the chromosomes can't divide, the cells can't divide. Okay? 1965, it was identified that the cells with short telomeres were no longer dividing. They recognized there was a relationship. In 1990, it was recognized that each time a human cell divides, a little bit of the telomere is lost. So with each cell division, the telomere gets a little bit shorter. In 2006, they've discovered that people with mood disorders like depression and bipolar disorder have shorter telomeres than people who don't have mood disorder. In 2011, it was discovered that institutionalized children growing up in orphanages, have shorter telomeres than children growing up in homes. 2012, they could predict how long a person will live based on the length of their telomeres, how much remaining lifespan you have. At birth, an infant has 8,000 base pairs in their telomeres. At age 35, they have around 3,800, and at age 65, around 1,500 base pairs left. And you can see this functionally. You take grandma, who's 65, and you take the grandchild, who's 5, and you put the same depth superficial laceration on both their forearms, and then you watch the healing process. How quick does the 5-year-old heal? How about grandma's arm? It really struggles because her base pairs, her cells are really struggling to divide and replace the ones that have been damaged, okay? And this is part of the aging process. Telomeres are shorter in males than females, but not at birth. At birth, males and females have the same length telomeres, but life is harder on men in certain ways that cause a more rapid loss of their telomeres, so they age faster. This is why one factor in why men die about 7 years earlier than women. Heredity counts for about 80% of the telomere length. Environment counts for 20%. Negative effects on telomere length are childhood adversity. Children growing up in conflicted homes, abuse environments, war zones, institutions. This mental stress actually shortens telomeres, and they will have shorter lifespans because of it. Mood disorders that I already mentioned, and hostility. You live as an adult in a hostile environment. Hatred, conflict, war, fighting with your spouse, this type of thing, you will shorten your telomeres and you will die more quickly. Positive effect on telomere length, healthy diet, doubling the amount of carotenoids. This would be the like beta carotene, carrots, yams, doubling those in your diet, lengthened telomeres by 2%. Those that had the highest amount of the beta carotene in their diet had telomeres that were 5 to 8% longer in a particular study than those with the least amount of the beta carotene. In my daily diet, when I'm at home, about 4 days a week, I eat 2 carrots 4 days a week. And so I just want to get good beta carotene, keep my carotenoids high. Plant-based diet increases your telomerase. Telomerase is the enzyme that lengthens telomeres. So people who are vegetarians actually have longer telomeres than people who are not vegetarians. And I think you know the data. Vegetarians live 7 to 10 years longer than non-vegetarians do. This is one factor and the reason why. But interesting one, they discovered that the older your father was when you were conceived, the longer your telomeres are at birth. Mother's age had no bearing. And it compounds. So if your dad was like 65 when you were conceived, and his dad was 65 when he was conceived, then you actually have compounded and you have longer telomeres that have added on. So you will actually start with a genetic predisposition to live longer than if your father was younger. Nobody really knows why that's the case. It's just something they've discovered. And then exercise. People who exercise regularly, turns on telomerase, they have longer telomeres than people who are sedentary. With all that being said, if you look at lifespan, a percentage of newborns living to be 65 years of age in 1900, it was around 40% of people lived to be 65 years of age. By 1997, it's 80 to 85% of people living to be 65 years of age. Notice our lifespan has increased over the last 100 years, the last century. But why are people living longer over the last 100 years if our genome is decaying? Reduced infections, clean water, safe food, sanitation, better nutrition, vaccinations, antibiotics, and improved dental care. These are the reasons we've extended our life over the last 100 years. It has nothing to do with the genetics. In 1900, 30% of all deaths were from infections. Pneumonia, influenza, tuberculosis, and stomach and bowel infections. 1990s, 60% of all deaths are from heart disease, cancer, and stroke. In fact, the top 6 killers, if you look at the top 6 killers today, they're all lifestyle related, not infections anymore. And so this is the real shift. We've been able to eliminate and reduce the environmental infections and things that were causing people to die at an earlier age. Dental care was huge, because when you have bad dental care, you get infections of your teeth, which then infect your blood, which contribute to endocarditis, infections inside your heart, and strokes. And people often died young because they had bad dental care. So what contributes to functional decline as we age? First, the fact that we do live longer. Second, telomere shortening. Third, mental stress. Mental stress. Mindset of unhealthy beliefs will drive a cascade of events, I'm going to walk you through here, that increase inflammation in the body and accelerate aging and increase your risk of physical health problems and dementia. The Bible says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. There was an interesting study done in 1979 where they took men who were 75 years of age. In 1979, they were 75 years of age, and they put them in a retreat with no material dated before 1959, and they were instructed to pretend for the next week that it was 1959, meaning that they were 55 years of age. So all the magazines, all the TV programming, the radio, all the furniture, everything was from 1959 or before, and they were given IDs with a picture of themselves from age 55 on it, and they were asked to spend the week in this retreat interacting and pretending it was 1959 and they were 55. They were tested before they went into the retreat, and after they came out of the retreat on physical strength, body posture, perception, vision, cognition, and memory were all tested. And what were the results? In every measure, they improved. Every measure. They had greater flexibility. They had better posture. They had improved hand strength. Their eyesight improved by 10%. Their memory improved by 10%. And more than half of them had improved IQ scores. And they appeared younger. When strangers were showed pictures of them before they went in and after they came out and asked to pick which one they were younger in, it was the one when they came out that they looked younger, but they were actually a week older. Our mindset is very important in our state of well-being. And one of the things that contributes to an accelerated decline is the mindset in our culture of retirement. Social Security retirement fosters the idea that life begins to end at 65. Okay? And we must educate people that life does not end at 65. Okay? You know, Moses was 80 years of age when he was called to ministry. He was 80 when he went to confront Pharaoh. So, one of the problems that many people think, well, I've worked, I'm 65, now I go home, put my feet up, get my popcorn, watch TV, and that's a sliding board right into the grave, into dementia. Okay? So it's okay, in my view, perfectly okay, and desirable to retire from a job where you can get a monthly pension. That's okay, as long as you engage in some other meaningful life work, ministry, or activity of some kind. You've got to stay active. Remember one of the design laws we talked about last night? The law of exertion. If you want something to get strong and stay strong, you must exercise it. Because if you don't use it, you lose it. And this mindset of retirement conditions people to stop using their mental and physical abilities. And so the NPTX2 gene, it's a gene that's been identified, produces the protein with the same name. This activates with new learning. New learning. This gene will turn on and produce this protein. And this protein causes the neurons to organize, to synchronize the brain circuits to form new memories. Turning this gene off makes one vulnerable to dementia. Keeping it on reduces your dementia risk. And what keeps this gene turned on? Activity of the neuron itself. New learning. When you have the mindset, I'm done, nothing more to learn, I can stop studying, I can stop learning, then this gene turns off and you begin to slowly lose neuronal health over time. And new learning isn't crossword puzzles. That's rote behavior, not new learning. So let's walk through a metaphor of some brain circuits and then show you how our thinking patterns and the things we believe can affect our stress circuits and contribute to an accelerated aging if we have unhealthy belief systems. I use the metaphor of a fire alarm in a school, little red box on the wall, you pull, break the piece of glass, you know what I'm talking about? Okay, in our brain, that is our amygdala. Now, when somebody pulls the alarm in the school, it not only alerts the people in the building, it alerts the 911 operator. So when your amygdala fires, it will alert the brain's 911 operator, which is your hypothalamus. Now, when the 911 operator is sitting there and the screen lights up, fire at the school, what's the 911 operator supposed to do? They're supposed to take an action. What action? Send in emergency responders. So when your amygdala fires, it alerts your hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus sends in emergency responders, and the emergency responders from our body come from our adrenal glands, adrenaline, and glucocorticoids, your stress hormones. And when the emergency responders arrive at the scene of the fire, there's a fire chief who assesses how big the blaze is, how many responders we have. We'll signal back to the 911 operator and say, hey, even though the alarm is still firing on your board, we've got enough, you don't need to call anymore. Everybody with me? In our brain, hippocampal neurons have receptors that register the rise of those stress hormones. And when they rise to a certain saturation, they will signal, and they will signal back to the hypothalamus, 911 operator, and say, hey, we've got enough. Stop calling them in from the adrenal glands. We're good. And at the school, there's an administrator, a principal, who assesses whether this is a real fire or some kid's playing a prank. And in your brain, that's the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the part where you reason and think. So how this might work in your life, you're walking along one day out here in nature, walking through a park, you step forward in the grass, and out of the corner of your eye, you see something black and slithery down by your feet. What are you likely to do? Will your alarm fire? Will alert your 911 operator, call in emergency responders, your adrenaline shoots up, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, blood is being shunted out of your intestines into your muscles, you're jumping and screaming and running 3 steps away, and then your prefrontal cortex catches up and goes, it's just a rubber hose. Haven't you had something like this happen? I just taught you a really important brain circuit. One of the jobs of your higher critical reasoning is to assess potential threats, your emotions, and when appropriate, turn off the alarm. Calm yourself down. You will discover many people have impairments in their ability to turn off their fear circuits. This circuit's broken for many people. We don't have time to really delve into it, but much of the brokenness comes from distorted thinking patterns and misbeliefs about things that actually fire it up instead. So next is the salience network. Salience means relevance or significance. As sensory information comes into your brain, sight, sound, touch, and so forth, it passes through the thalamus on its way to its ultimate cortical destination. As it passes through the thalamus, if it's a threat to you, your amygdala, your alarm, will fire, that's a potential danger, threat, and shoot that information up to your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex where you think and reason to make a plan to address the potential danger. If it's not a threat to you, it passes through, and frequently you don't even notice it. You're unaware of this sensory information. If you listen very carefully, you can hear the blower blowing on the projector in this room. Can you all hear that? That blower has been blowing the entire time. Sound waves have been traveling through the atmosphere, hitting your tympanic membrane, activating your acoustic neuron. The signal has been going through your thalamus, and your salience network said, irrelevant, ignore it. And you were not even consciously aware it was happening. It's an automated network. What would happen if you smelled smoke like this building was on fire smoke right now? Would your salience network let you ignore that? No, that's important. Pay attention. Make a plan. Okay? Let's say you're home cooking a hot cast iron skillet on the stove. You're on the phone watching a TV program, a little distracted. You reach out and your hand touches the hot cast iron skillet. Okay? A pain signal will immediately be transferred up the spinothalamic pathway. And as it comes through the spinothalamic pathway, that transmits pain signals. As it hits the thalamus, the amygdala is going to fire. That's a potential threat to you. And it's going to immediately shoot that up with urgency to your thinking, focus, attention regions of your brain. And no matter where your attention was, TV, phone call, your attention will not stay on the TV and phone call. Your attention will be irresistibly drawn to your hand. Make a plan, and you make a plan. Ice in an oven mitt. And once you make the plan, ice in an oven mitt, what happens to the alarm and the urgency? It turns off. Okay? Normal operation of salience. But sometimes the salience network becomes disrupted. And when the salience network becomes disrupted, it becomes disrupted at the anterior cingulate cortex. And so instead of being able to have this signal make it up here to where you think and reason, if we're blocking it at the anterior cingulate cortex, then the amygdala will send it into the orbital cortex, the part above the orbit of your eye. Now, the normal function of the orbital cortex, what it normally does for you, is it gives you a conviction of wrongdoing and will redirect you away from inappropriate actions and behaviors. So if you were to try to stand up in this room right now and begin taking your clothes off in front of the rest of us, your orbital cortex would start firing like crazy. You get really stressed and uncomfortable. Don't do it. Don't do it. Aren't you glad you have an orbital cortex? Amen, she says. Yes. Okay. Yes, and so are the rest of us, right? Yes. Okay? But so when the orbital cortex, when the salience network becomes disrupted, though, whatever this stress is that's stressing you is not being processed here in your reasoning, rational part of your brain where you can make a plan. It's being sent here, and the normal function, conviction of wrongdoing, so people get negative ruminating loops going. Have you ever seen people with negative ruminating loops? Okay? And the negative ruminating loops are going to cause problems. Now, I'll give you an example where most people do this transiently. And that's in the aftermath of a major life loss. Somebody close to them has just died. And the initial response is, no, it can't be, no. So they're choosing to not really fully embrace it and deal with it. And so the stress, they're still aware of it, but it's now going to be processed here rather than here. And the normal job of your orbital cortex is conviction of wrongdoing. And so people say, it's my fault. I booked them on that airplane. If I would have booked them on a different one, they wouldn't have been on the one that went down. It's my fault. It's my fault. If I'd have kept them on the phone 10 extra minutes, they wouldn't have been in the intersection when the truck ran the red light and hit them. It's my fault. I knew their girlfriend just broke up with them, and they were stressed, and they were hurt, and they were crying, but I just worked a double shift. But if I'd have gone over last night after work, they wouldn't have killed themselves last night. You see this? Okay? Negative ruminating loops, because the orbital cortex normal job is to convict you of wrongdoing. Now, what disrupts the salience network? I don't know if I have it somewhere else in the slides or not. I may repeat. I can't remember. But what disrupts the salience network is believing lies, denial, which is a form of lying to oneself, actually doing wrong to another person and refusing to repent. And then if somebody actually wrongs you, somebody has stolen from you, somebody's actually done wrong, and you refuse to forgive. Have you seen people looping on an actual wrong that was done maybe 35 years ago, but they're still looping on it?
Still living there.
Okay? And so what reconnects the salience network is truth, repentance, and forgiveness. That reconnects the salience network. Now what happens if the amygdala won't turn off? If we've got these loops going, we stay stressed, we stay worried, we stay anxious, we stay agitated, we stay hostile, what happens? Well, the amygdala will activate your sympathetic nervous system, which turns on your macrophages, which is your immune system. Now why will your amygdala do this? Because the immune system is to your body what the National Guard is to our nation. And the National Guard is to protect our nation from invasion. That's its purpose, protect the nation from invasion. And so when your alarm system fires, it says to your immune system, DEFCON 2, prepare for invasion. So if you're out walking on a trail and you come around a corner and there's a bear or a mountain lion or something on the trail, your alarm fires. It's a threatening situation, and it kicks your immune system on because you might have to fight that. You might have enemy invaders, bacteria and other things trying to invade, so your immune system gets turned on. And the type of immune system that gets turned on is your innate immunity, and your innate immunity would be analogous to a shotgun in a home invader, where you blast wide scatter shot and you get the invader, but all these little BBs are damaging your house as well. And the little BBs would be the inflammatory cytokines. So when you kick up your immune system turns on the macrophages, which begin releasing inflammatory cytokines, which would damage bacteria, which would kill viruses, but you don't have any of those invading because you're under chronic worry, ruminating stress. So you're just walking around your house, blasting holes in your house. And this chronic stress with the immune system kicked up, with these inflammatory cytokines, they damage insulin receptors. And you get insulin resistance in the face of increasing glucocorticoids. Corticoids, steroids that tell your body to put glucose into your bloodstream because you're in fight or flight mode and you need energy because you're chronically stressed. But now your body's becoming resistant because these inflammatory cytokines make insulin receptors less responsive to insulin. This leads to increased risk of obesity, hypercholesterolemia, heart attacks, strokes, and dementia. So one of the factors that increase our risk of dementia is our mindset, our thinking patterns, believing lies, living in denial, unforgiveness, and unrepentance. Or, I'm no good. Have you seen this mindset? I can't do anything right. I'm no good. Everybody hates me. Trying to control outcomes. Worrying about the future. See this all the time. The healthy Christian approach to life, making decisions and governance of yourself, and I give this to my patients, which is right, healthy, and reasonable. And if you look at decisions you have to make, right means morally and legally right. Right and wrong. What's right and wrong? But not every decision in life is morally right or wrong. Next, healthy. What's actually healthy? Across the domains of health. Relational health, physical health, spiritual. What's healthy? And not everything in life is right or wrong or healthy. What's reasonable? I got a pair of new shoes. That pair is $300. That pair is $75. They both have equal What's a reasonable decision? Right, healthy, reasonable decision making. But many people that come to my office, they're not making decisions in governance of self which are right, healthy, and reasonable, and then simply saying, and I trust God with how it turns out. Instead, they're anticipating how it's going to turn out, and they're trying to manage either other people, or the world around them to get the world to conform to how they want it to go. I want this person to like me. I want this person to not be mad at me. And so they'll start conforming decision-making to control another person's responses rather than making the decision on what's actually right, healthy, and reasonable governance of me, and leave other people free to like me or not. The people who worry about outcomes and try to control outcomes are taking responsibilities they have no authority on to themselves, and thus they live under huge stress all the time. And then we talked briefly last night about fear-inducing God constructs, living with a God that you're afraid of. Not the old King James English of fear. The old King James English, fear God and give glory to Him, means awe, reverence, admiration, esteem, humble submission to. It has nothing to do with terror and dread. The modern mind doesn't hear the word fear like the mind of a person living in the 16 and 1700s. We hear it as to be frightened by and to run away and hide from. Right. That is not what a healthy fear of God. Healthy fear is being so overwhelmed, admire, but also love and trust Him. Increased worry, stress, anxiety, fear activates the brain's fear circuits, turns on the inflammatory cascade, the immune response, contributing to accelerated aging. So mindset is one of the things that increases our risk of dementia, a unhealthy mindset. And then dysfunctional relationships, regardless of the source of the dysfunction. It may not be your fault. Kids who are abused in their childhood, they have done nothing wrong. But the data is overwhelming. Kids who are abused in childhood come into adulthood with all types of neurobiological disruptions. Their amygdalas are upregulated. They are more sensitive to criticism. They're more reactive to perceived threats and or rejection. They are less trusting of other people. They're more accusatory. They're more fault-finding. They have less capacity to bond and connect with people. Okay, it's not their fault. They can experience healing. I work with many kids who've been adults who were traumatized as kids, and as they work through that, they can experience healing. But that type of relationship through life accelerates the aging process. It's a highly stressful way to live. Animal studies show that pups of nurturing moms, those who licked and groomed, were compared to pups of neglect moms. And when they looked at their amygdala and their capacity to calm the amygdala, the ones of the neglect moms had upregulated amygdalas, which were more reactive and less capable of calming themselves than the pups of mothers who licked and groomed. And they had more social impairments later in life if they had a neglect mom. They weren't abused, they were just neglected. Well, they thought, well, maybe this is neurobiological. Maybe this is genetic. Maybe there's something in the genes that cause these mothers to have social impairments, and they're just passing that along to their kids. And so they took the pups and the neglect moms at birth and put them in with a different mom who would lick and groom them, and they watched the brain development, and their brains developed normally. So it was not genetically driven. It was environmentally driven.
Right.
Child abuse and gene expression, 41 Canadian men, 25 severely abused, were compared to 16 controls. Looked at DNA in the hippocampus, where all new learning takes place, and they found 362 genes expressed in opposite directions. The most significant were those which regulate neuroplasticity. That's the ability of the brain to branch new connections, prune old connections, in other words, change and learn. So people who've gone through abuse, not only do they have their neural circuits develop in ways that they're more anxious and more socially impaired and more fearful, their genes are expressed in such a way that it's harder for them to learn. Doesn't mean they can't, but it takes much more effort and working with them before the brain begins to change, because these genes that allow for plasticity are expressed in ways that are slower to respond. This is a study looking at individuals and followed for 32 years. They looked at 3 measures of childhood adversity. They looked at overt abuse, physical or sexual, severe poverty, or neglect. And if you had none of those, you're represented in the blue bar. If you had one of those, you're in the green bar. And if you had 2 or 3, you're in the gray bar. And then they just followed for the next 32 years and said, how many developed depression? And in the grouping to the left, you'll notice that if you had none of the adversity, about 12% of the people developed depression. If you had one of those adversities, it was over 20% developed depression, and 2, over 30% developed depression. And then the cluster to the far right is looking at metabolic problems like obesity, diabetes, adult onset diabetes, hypercholesterolemia. And again, the bars represent the same 3 groups. None of those adversities, 12% developed metabolic problems. Over 20% if you had 1, over 30% if you had 2. Why? Because activating the amygdala through childhood adversity turns on the immune system, which causes insulin insulin resistance, which drives both the metabolic problems that I've already told you about, but also reacts back upon the brain. And we will show you this afternoon specifically what's happening in the brain that leads to depression earlier in life and then dementia later in life. Adults who abuse this, children have higher rates of medical illnesses, mental illnesses, suicide rates, alcohol and drug problems, and much disability and earlier death compared to kids. You know, Jesus said, woe to those who abuse the little children. It'd be better to have a millstone tied around your neck. So the Bible, though, also promises long life with healthy family relationships. Honor your mother and father. Their days might be long upon the earth that the Lord your God gives you. Some people who see the world through a imperial law model that God runs the universe like Caesar runs Rome says, well, God says if you do this behavior, then I will reward you by using my divine power to ensure that you live a long time. But if you don't have a good relationship and honor your parents, then I'll use my power to make sure you die young. They see it all as inflicted by the authority. Rather than understanding that God is the creator of reality and he built life to operate on certain protocols. And when you have love for other people, you have healthy relationships, you have less fear. When you have less fear, you have less amygdala activation. When you have less amygdala activation, you have less of these stress hormones going. You actually have a healthier body. You live longer. Right. In harmony with God's design. Okay, this is how the reality works. Okay, next factor, lack of spirituality, lack of altruism. The Bible teaches to love and that love is life. The entire law summed up in a single command, love your neighbor as yourself. And love is beneficent. It's not self-seeking. It's functional. It's operational. It's how God built reality to operate, the principle of giving. And that's why people, in the way of righteousness, there's life. It's like saying, in the ways of the laws of health, there's life. That's all that means. In the way God built things is life. That's what that means. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. So I gave an example last night about breathing, the principle of giving, how life is built. Well, water. The oceans give their waters to the clouds, which rain over the lands, forming lakes, rivers, and streams, which flow back to the ocean, a never-ending circle of giving upon which life is built. If a body of water separates and will not flow, will not give, what happens in that body of water? Stagnates and everything in it dies. The law of love is the law of giving upon which life is built to operate. Studies show that adults who volunteer, give of themselves after accounting for variables such as education, baseline health, smoking, those volunteers live longer, have less illness, less disability, less depression, less dementia, and stay out of nursing homes longer than adults who don't volunteer. God constructs in the brain. Newberg and his group took individuals 65 years of age and older, had to meditate 12 minutes a day on a God of love for 30 days. At the beginning of the study, they measured the size of the anterior cingulate cortex. Not only is that the seat of the will we talked about last night, it's also where you experience altruistic, other-centered love, compassion and empathy for other people. And they measured the size of the anterior cingulate cortex. They took baseline measures of heart rate and blood pressure, which is a measure of stress, and did standardized memory testing. At the end of 30 days, meditating 12 minutes a day on a God of love, they could measure growth in the anterior cingulate cortex. It was actually larger on MRI scans. Law of exertion. See, if you exercise something, it gets stronger. See? That's how it works. But the way your brain is wired, guess what? Their heart rates and blood pressures were lower at the end of 30 days because when your love circuits are active, it turns off your fear circuit. Perfect love casts out fear neurobiologically. Heart rates and blood pressures lower. And they had 30% improvement in memory testing within 30 days. These are people over 65. Had another group meditate on an angry God, a punishing God, a distant God. None of these positive benefits. The positive benefits are seen meditating on a God of love. This is a different gene called the repressor element 1 silencing transcript, just REST gene. It's a cell. This protein is a cell conductor, turning on and off other genes, impacts neuronal growth and brain circuitry development, protects your memory circuits. And low levels, if you're low in this protein in your brain, it increases your risk of dementia. It's turned off by chronic stress. Chronic worry, chronic fear turns this gene off. It's turned on by meditation and healthy spirituality. Loving other people turns this gene on. How healthy spirituality helps slow the aging process? Because it activates the higher cortical regions, prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, where we have truth, prefrontal cortex, love, anterior cingulate cortex, which calm fear circuitry, reducing the inflammatory cascades. Altruistic activities, which keep you engaged in relationships and physical activity. Reduced anxiety and worry because you're trusting your higher power with outcomes rather than trying to carry the load of the world on your shoulders. Healthier lifestyles, generally taking care of the spirit temple rather than abusing the spirit temple. Healthier relationships, willing to forgive and seek reconciliation rather than maintain hostility, which turns off the amygdala. So a lot of healthy things going on there. And then last few minutes, we're going to talk about the two grand world belief systems. And there are two grand world belief systems, and they are the godless origins of life, or a intelligent God created life. These are the two grand philosophies. Under each of those, there's different sub-directions and different ways people describe it, but at the end, there's no God, it just happened on its own. There's an intelligence that created things. These are the two world belief systems. We can't go back in a lab and test the Big Bang, the moment of creation. We can't repeat that in a lab and see it. But the premises of the two theories are testable, and they both rest on premises. The godless origin and the God-created origin. And you can test these, and they're reproducible. Something came from nothing at all. There was nothing, and from it something came. That's the godless origin. Something came from something that already pre-existed in the creation story. Well, you can show something coming from something all the time. You cannot show something coming from nothing. Order came out of chaos without intelligent input. Or order came out of chaos with intelligent input. This is a second law of thermodynamics issue now. If you're not intelligently putting energy into a system, that system will become disordered and decay. There's no evidence anywhere of order coming out of chaos without intelligent input. It's just the opposite. Life coming from non-living matter versus life coming from another living organism. Again, it's never been shown about life coming from non-living. It's amazing the denial on the godless origins people that they would actually still argue for this when you can't ever demonstrate it. Or, this is a big one, DNA gains information through mutation versus DNA degrades through mutation. The greatest false belief in science, in my view, is abiogenesis, life originating in non-living matter, all on its own without intelligent input. This is the greatest false belief in my view. Can anyone demonstrate that in science? Challenge it. Show me that. Show me. You can't, because it's impossible. Living organisms require, now understand what for any organism, whether it's a bacteria, or whether it's a human being or anything in between, there's three elements required for a living organism. Matter. You have to have physical matter. Atoms, proteins, and the things that are made up, proteins, DNA, and so forth and so on. You have to have energy. And you have to have organized, usable data, coded information in the genome. Scientists who deny a God focus entirely on the physical matter. And they give all these theories to your kids about how there could have been a primordial soup, and in this primordial soup, a lightning struck, and as this lightning struck, then it formed these molecules, and these molecules become the building blocks of life, in other words, DNA molecules, okay? This would be like saying there was a terrible storm in a chaotic place where there was only water and rocks. And in this terrible storm that went on for 3 million years or 3 billion years, eventually the lightning and the storms caused the rocks to form the letters of the alphabet. If we give them that, give it to them. Okay, fine, we've got the letters of the alphabet. They formed all on their own. It's preposterous, but it formed all on their own. Having the letters of the alphabet do not form the Encyclopedia Britannica.
That's right.
It is not usable information. Okay, having DNA molecules still requires someone to put those molecules together in organized ways that code information. There is no plausible explanation at all in the world by any human being how the DNA with its 3.2 billion base pairs became coded without an intelligence. It doesn't work. So where did the coded information come from? So some atheists recognize this now, and they actually say that aliens seeded life here. This is Dawkins. This is Dawkins' position now. We don't believe that life came here on its own. Aliens brought life here, and then after they brought the life here and seeded it, then it grew on its own. But it didn't come up on it because they know they can't have a plausible explanation. And so I just tell them, well, thank you, Dawkins. You're now at Genesis 1:1. And in modern language, the earth began when an extraterrestrial intelligence came and terraformed it, establishing viable atmosphere and a stable planet. You understand, God is not an earth being.
Right.
He is an extraterrestrial.
Alien.
He is. He is not from earth. That's Genesis 1:1. And understand, as a Christian, Genesis 1:1 is not a or Genesis chapter 1 is not a description of the creation of the universe. It's a description of the creation of the solar system. Job chapter 38 says the sons of God sang together for joy when the foundations of the earth were laid. If you accept Scripture, that means there were intelligent living beings out there in the universe who were celebrating the creation of this planet. They existed before this planet was made, before Genesis 1. Meaning the universe had been created sometime by God, and we're not told in Scripture how many billions of years ago God created the universe. But at some time in universal history, He came to this corner of the Milky Way and decided to terraform this solar system. And so on day 4, He creates the sun, moon, and stars, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter of this solar system. Not the entire universe, is my view. And one of the problems we have is when we try to make the Bible say something, it actually doesn't say. Galileo came to the church and said, the sun doesn't revolve around the earth revolves around the sun. And they, of course, imprisoned him. Because he was denying Scripture, because they had always known that the earth was the center of the universe. Well, they were trying to make the Bible teach something it doesn't teach. I think sometimes with the origin stories, we sometimes miss the point that there's already intelligent life before earth was created. That means there was a universe that God created before He created earth. So if science is more consistent with creation, why do so many honest people prefer a godless view? Why do they do that? If they're just scientific, why do they not want to follow the science back to an intelligent? Here's why they don't. Because the historic view of God taught by Christianity is worse than a godless view. The historic view of God that will burn you at the stake, the Inquisition, the Crusades, the distorted view of God taught by the Church of the Dark Ages, and still by many Christians today who at the funeral of a gay person will show up with picket signs, God hates fags and God burns fags in hell. And you wonder why people prefer a godless view. Because they don't see the love of Jesus Christ, the grace, the kindness, the goodness in much of the church.
That's true.
And so when they tell me they don't believe in God, I typically say, tell me about the God you don't believe in. And they describe me, I go, good for you, I don't believe in Him either. Seriously. It's good they don't believe in that God. I hope you don't believe in that God. But that doesn't mean there's no God. Richard Dawkins, God of the Old Testament, I won't read this, you've heard it before, but he talks about this terrible, abusive being, and this is how he sees the God of the Old Testament, as this terribly abusive, horribly filicidal, homicidal maniac. And good for him for rejecting that view of God. Healthiest worldview, the data shows the healthiest worldview is to believe in a benevolent, trustworthy God. This is, when I say healthiest for your physiology, healthiest for your mind, healthiest for your brain, reduces your risk of dementia, to have a belief in a benevolent, loving God construct as Jesus revealed Him to be. That's the healthiest worldview. But the next healthiest worldview is to believe in no God, but to believe in moral humanism. That's actually healthier than to believe in an abusive, authoritative, punishing God who is the source of inflicted torture and pain upon you. That's the worst view. That's paganism, by the way. If you look at the pagan gods of all the cultures of the world, there were these horribly abusive deities that you had to do things to and offer sacrifices, and typically the sacrifice of human blood, a human sacrifice in order to appease them. And much of Christianity has our God in heaven needing to be offered the blood of a human sacrifice, not to kill us. So preventative care is the other thing that slows the aging process. Routine checkups, vaccines, dental care, hearing aids, glasses, walkers, and safety to reduce injury, so forth. So I'll just leave this action plan up here because you've got about 2 minutes to take it down and write this stuff down. But in the book, and you've got the copy of the book, every chapter has learning points at the end and an action plan of how to apply it at every end of every chapter. So, and then if you have questions, write them down, and we're going to do questions this afternoon. So thank you very much.